Good morning, student. In theme 6, our last topic, today we covered the crisis of the 14th century, then social unrest, and the last topic, political changes. The crisis of the 14th century. Europe economic expansions slowed down due to the three main factors or three main reasons. The first one, the climatic changes. Instead, cold, cyclone, and floods. In the North Europe, by the end of the 13th century, the warm summers of the previous 300 years had given way to bitterly cold summers. Seasons for growing crops were reduced by a month, and it became difficult to grow crops on the higher ground. So the storms and the oceanic flooding destroying many farmsteads, which resulted in less income in the tax for the government, and the opportunities offered by favorable climatic conditions before the 13th century had led to large scale reclamation of the land of forest and pastures for agriculture, but intensive plowing had exhausted the soil despite the practice of three fields rotation of crops because clearance was not accompanied by proper soil conservation. Then the shortage of the pasture reduced the number of the cattle. Population growth was outstripping resource, and the immediate result was famine, and severe famine hit Europe between 1315 to 1317, followed in the 1320s by massive cattle deaths. Then decline in trade, scarcity of the metal coins. In addition, trade was hit by a severe shortage of the metal money because of the shortfall in the output of the silver mines in the Australia and Serbia. This forced the government to reduce the silver content of the currency and to mix it with the cheaper metal. So this was also the main reason because the silver on that time that was not came from the Australia or and from the Serbia. Then the third was the plague or the Black Death. The worst was not yet to come. As trade expanded in the 13th and 14th century, ships carrying goods from, here you see in this picture, Black Death by the rats because the plague spread up from the rats. So the ships carrying the goods from distant countries had started arriving in European ports. Along with the ships came rats, carrying the deadly bubonic plague infection, which one called the Black Death. Western Europe, relatively isolated in entire centuries, which was hit by the epidemic between 1347 to 1350. The modern estimate of mortality in that epidemic is that 20% of the people of the whole Europe died. Now, in this time, you see that because of the corona epidemic, pandemic, we see that the same type of the situation on that time, the same, with some places losing as much as 40% of the population. So, in this time, on that time, this uh, epidemic was spread up only in the Spain. Oh, sorry, only in the Europe. But now, if we see in this time, the corona or this COVID spread up in the whole of the world. Here you see the death of the people on that time. Now, the social unrest. The income of lords was badly hit because of that three main reason. They tried to revive labor services. This was violently opposed by the peasants, particularly the better educated, more prosperous ones. Because now in this time the peasants were not illiterate, they were educated, they were prosperous, though they were also show their resentment against all these social unrest. In 1323, peasants revolted in the Flanders, 1358 in the France, in 1381 in the England. Now, despite the severe repression, the sheer intensity of peasant opposition ensured that the old feudal relation could not be reimposed. So they were against that feudal system which was already existed in the Europe. So they wanted to remove this system from the Europe. Now we discuss about the political changes. In the 15th and the 16th century, European kings strengthened their military and financial power. They created powerful states. The new monarchies, Louis XI in France, Maximilian in Austria, Henry VII in England, and Isabella and the Ferdinand in the Spain, started these new monarchies were also established in all these countries and started the process of organizing standing armies, a permanent bureaucracy, national taxation. And in Spain and in Portugal we also saw the same thing begin to play a role in the Europe expansion overseas. The impact of these political changes, which im- uh, impact we saw through that political changes. First of all, we saw the powerful army. They had a powerful army. Use of gunpowder and cannon. They used the new technology, the gunpowder on that time, very, very powerful. Decline of feudal structure. Again we saw this thing that the lords they were also lost their power. Organized tax, the tax was fully organized, a proper system. They were also used for the taxes. Suppression of the feudal lords, and then lords changed as the sporters, they changed their dress, and their power becomes very, very less. Growth money based economy and struggle between kings and the parliament. Again, we saw the conflicts were also going on in between the kings and the parliament. The parliament in England and France. The later history of the France. So first of all, I am telling you about the France, a state journal of the France in 1614. The later history of the France and England was to be shaped by these changes in the power structures. In the reign of the child king Louis XIII of France in the 1614, a meeting was held of the France Consultative Assembly known as the Estate Journal, with three houses of represent of three estate or order, that one clergy, nobility, and the rest of the people. After this was not summoned, called to be a meeting, okay, not called a meeting again for nearly 2 centuries till 1789, because the kings did not want to share the power with these three orders in France. In England, now I am telling you about the England. England was very different. Even before the Norman conquest, Anglo-Saxons had a great council which the king had to consult before imposing any tax. This developed into what was called the Parliament, which consisted the House of Lords, the member of which were the lords and the clergy, and the House of the Commons representing towns and rural areas. King Charles I ruled for 11 years without calling the Parliament. When he was forced to call it because he needed money, a selection of parliament decided to go to war against him and later executed him and established a republic. They did not last long and monarchy was restored, but on the condition that parliament would be called regularly. So on this condition, the monarchy was restored in the England. Today, France has a republican form of the government and the England has a monarchy. This is because of the different directions that the histories of these two countries took after the 17th century. Okay, thank you, student. Today we completed our this chapter.